Hi, good morning, everybody. Do we have everybody here? Was I the last one? One, two, three, four.
Sue
We're missing
sends
Sue.
her regrets. Sue's not going to be able to make it this morning.
Okay,
And I will have to leave at 11:30.
got it. I guess we can commence with our part two of our board retreat. We have a quorum, so we can begin. We'll just continue with our board retreat from the agenda from last time. I think Matt distributed some materials last night, and hopefully you got a chance to at least thumb through those. But other than that, I have no introductory remarks. So I'll turn it over to Matt to get us started. So go ahead, Matt, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do think we'll need to go through the formalities of calling the meeting to order and public comment and all that.
That's true. We are open. All right. We have a quorum present and we'll begin. I guess item number one is any public comment period. Mr. Book, do we have anybody from the public who wants to address the board this morning?
Thank you, Chairman Mahler. We do not have anyone at this time.
Okay, we will close the public comment period and go forward with the rest of the agenda. Is there anything from the board or staff before we get started with our retreat planning that they want to bring to the board's attention at this time? Okay. Closing that out then, I'll turn it over to Matt and have him get us started. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, board members. Welcome back to Long Range Planning Retreat Part 2. See if I can advance the slide here. There we go. All right, so we are picking up largely where we left off a month ago. I'm going to make some introductory comments, sort of set the stage here, provided some additional context. But as a brief reminder, we are talking about a 25-year plan. This is a vision for 2045. And the outcome of this 12-month process is going to be this longer-term vision and sort of 5-year chunks of implementation that align with our millage planning. Also a good moment to just remind everyone that this retreat is really at the very beginning of this planning process, really month 13, the very beginning. And it's very early. We've gotten consultants on board, but we haven't really nailed down specifics. Well, we're nailing the specifics with them down now. So you're at a point where your input and ability to shape this process is very high, and that's, I think, very good and appropriate. So context for this retreat, but I guess I should also say, there's going to be a lot of other opportunities. We'll have this retreat. We'll still be talking about this at next year's retreat, and we will have process updates and opportunities to have input, probably with the consultants and with staff throughout this process. So we're just getting started. So anything that doesn't occur to us today, we will have time to bring it up later. So as we mentioned last time, the general goals for the retreat are to sort of nail down some basic context. We did a lot of that last time. Really get closer into your priorities. If we have to make decisions, what sort of decisions should we make? And spur discussion and get your ideas, get your feedback. We have a lot of data and staff perspective that we'll be sharing today. A lot of it is there to try to give you something to react to give you something to inspire you so that we can hear your thoughts. So day one, like I said, we got a lot of things started. Day two, we're picking up where we left off. We're going to continue the discussion of fixed route planning, go into much more detail. We're going to expand the discussion of paratransit to get into even more sort of on-demand types of services that are very much in the future. And then we have a recap at the end where I'll come back and say, was there anything else? any other idea that didn't neatly fall into one of those two categories or one of those two earlier discussions, so that we make sure we make a space for that. And then we'll do wrap-ups and talk about next steps briefly. I am going to try to keep an eye on the clock and look for breaks naturally somewhere around the top of the hours, so that we're not, we don't suffer from Zoom fatigue too badly. So I will attempt to keep that in mind. Now, last time I brought up what I thought were important key considerations for us to think about as we have our discussion. The first was the recognition that a lot of our thinking these days is dominated by the pandemic. A lot of what we've been discussing recently pertaining to the August restoration of services is obviously very tightly linked to the pandemic. And in this exercise, we're really thinking about what do we do after the pandemic. So we're thinking about, a further distance, hopefully after things have settled down and begin to return to normal. But we acknowledge that things will get back to normal, but normal is going to look different. Exactly how it's going to look different, still to be determined. We acknowledge that we need to maintain some flexibility for it, but we want to elevate everyone's thinking out of the moment and into a little bit more longer term. The other thing we mentioned last time was how the board guides this process. You have a number of policies that really shape the planning effort that we're doing. Your executive limitations policies create what I call a funnel or guardrails that define how this process has to operate. It must be transparent. It cannot risk fiscal jeopardy. We have to involve the public, things like that. And your ends policies are really critical. They, in effect, are the goals, the outcomes that we are striving to achieve. And the board ultimately has a great deal of power, frankly, over this process through your policies. And if you change your policies, that can change the direction of the process. I'll mention we had a great discussion with the consulting team the other week, where we sort of broke down your policy governance approach, explained to them what executive limitations policies were, what the ends policies were, and I think I saw the light bulbs going off and actually sort of heard them say, this is really great because we struggle to get boards sometimes to articulate their outcomes very clearly. What do you want? So this actually, I think, will help that entire process tremendously, the work you've already done. And then finally, we noted the need to balance aspirations with realism. We have a community with a tremendous amount of great thinkers who are going to bring forward a large number of ideas, and we want to be able to take it all in. But we're going to have to balance it off with some of the realistic challenges of funding limitations, timing. Some things, frankly, may not be possible due to sequencing issues or organizational capacity or funding limitations until year 10 or year 15, and grappling with the reality of priorities and trade-offs. And it'll be an ongoing effort throughout the entire process to find the right balance between our priorities, between trade-offs. Sometimes they will happen at a sort of a meta level. Other times they will hinge on very specific tactical decisions, but they're going to be there. Now, before I turn this over to Forrest and Brian for the fun stuff, I want to introduce some new ideas, some new ways of thinking that we're going to introduce today, some new terminology and some new ways of considering this. As I mentioned before, previously we've talked about service planning at a very conceptual, abstract level, and I compare that to the 30,000-foot view from a plane. Well, we took the plane down to 20,000 feet last time. We're going to take it down to 15,000 feet today. And in order to do that, we're going to get into more specifics, more tactical, more service design things. There are some terminology points that I want to introduce today and some concepts I want to discuss because they're going to show up repeatedly in what Forrest and Brian are bringing up, and they'll come up throughout the next 12 months. So from a terminology standpoint, we're going to start using some slightly different terms, and they're borrowed from the for-profit sector, the business sector. So we're going to talk about our population increasingly in terms of markets. And I don't mean like shopping markets, I mean market segmentation. You know, rather than identifying the population by where they live geographically, we may start defining them or talking about them in terms of travel markets. And that's not done, I want to be clear, sometimes people get the wrong impression when we use these terms. And they think that we're trying to be a for-profit organization, and there's maybe an implication that we're going to leave people of low income behind. I want to be clear that is not the intent at all. We're just trying to borrow some of the thinking. When we start talking about growth, it's helpful to borrow the thinking from the private sector. So to say we have a social need in neighborhood A is very useful. To look at that as a market and say, is it growing? Is it shrinking? Is it shifting? What are their needs? It really helps us sort of break a big issue down into smaller, more digestible chunks, which is helpful when we design services. That really is the demand side of a supply and demand equation. What does the market want? If we were Johnson & Johnson and we were developing a new type of toothpaste as a product to sell, we would be very interested in focus groups and what does the market for toothpaste users really want these days. And that would help us design the product. In our case, the services, the products that we provide, our services, how do we design them effectively to meet the needs of the market, to meet the demand that's out there? So a lot of this we've talked about in various ways before, and we're just introducing some of this new terminology to help us talk about it in more granular detail. A good example of this will show up in Forrest's work when he shows you the graph about when we introduced the TheRide agreement. And you can see that we caught a new travel market, university students primarily. And you'll see that our ridership increased dramatically when we did that. So you'll see little bits and pieces of that. Productivity and efficiency and thresholds are also increasingly going to come up. And this is something Eric mentioned before, and we've been needing to reintroduce as well. So I'm going to take just a moment and talk a little bit about this. What is productivity and utilization? It's usually basically how many people are using a given resource divided, the output divided by the input. So passengers per hour is a great example of utilization. Frequently, these things come up, unfortunately, from staff when we have to maybe say why a particular new proposal is challenging or may not be the best use of money. It's not because we enjoy being killjoys or pills. And it's not because we're just really excited about efficiency for the sake of efficiency. We are hyper aware of our limited resources and the needs that are out there in this community and how far, frankly, sometimes the resources fall short. Every year, staff talk to innumerable members of the community. We hear from all sorts of folks, and the messages that stick with us the hardest are some of the hardest decisions we have to make, where we'll hear about or hear from a member of the community who, due to circumstances beyond their control, really needs some help getting where they need to go. Sometimes we can help them, and sometimes we have to acknowledge that our resources are tied up in some other endeavor, and there's nothing we can do for them. And that really affects staff. You don't get into this business without caring a little bit or a lot for the communities you serve. So hearing that sort of thing can affect us quite a bit. And when you work in that environment, you really start to see that waste or inefficiency directly translates into leaving somebody behind. Money that is poorly spent in neighborhood A means that somebody in neighborhood B didn't get to travel today, didn't get to their job, didn't get to the grocery store. So that becomes a very important point for staff because we interface with those needs directly. So productivity and utilization become good ways for us to effectively think about rationing service. And no one likes to use the phrase rationing, but when you have a limited amount of resources and far more needs than you have resources, you have to find some way to distribute them transparently, fairly, and impartially to do the most good and benefit the most people you can with the limited resources you have. Unfortunately, the community doesn't organize itself to be efficient for us. We frequently find someone's built a new community center or something else in a place where we don't have service. People put the seniors home here in the grocery store on the opposite side of town. And so we're always battling to try to configure our services in a way that does the most good with the resources that we have. Much of our service design really comes down to that. How do we do the most good with the funds that we have? And if we're going to expand the pie, if we're going to get more resources, how are we going to use those resources to do the most good that we can? A few weeks ago, the board, I shared with you and members of the community some concerns that I had shared with the Regional Transit Authority about a commuter rail proposal. And you received that letter from me. And you may remember that I made some observations in there about the cost benefit of that project. There was expected to be a $300 million expense in capital cost to serve less than 2,000 people. I watched the recipients of that letter struggle with a lot of the same trade-offs that we talked about last time. And I sent that letter not because I don't like commuter rail. I quite enjoy trains. I think they're great. It's not because I don't like the RTA or the people who might have been using that service. It's because, frankly, I can think of a lot better uses for $300 million. A lot of other people could be served. A lot more people, frankly, could be served. So when we talked about productivity and cost effectiveness and thresholds, a lot of it comes down to how do we use limited resources to have the greatest good. So thresholds for productivity. If we're going to use it as a measure, where do we draw the line? Where's the cutoff? So an interesting thing about public transit is that we're a public good. We are not a for-profit organization. So we do not have a profit motive. We don't even have a break-even motive. It's interesting that passengers pay some of the fares and we have some cost recovery, but as a public good, that's really not our priority. So economic measures of productivity kind of become meaningless here. I can't tell you, using a break-even point as a threshold or a cutoff is meaningless because we lose money on every single service we provide. That's part of our mission, is to serve elements in this community that we might not be able to afford it, to help address issues like environmental issues that we see a public good for that warrant the subsidy. So we tend to not use economic measures when we talk about thresholds. We tend to defer to utilization measures. Again, passengers per hour, trying to figure out helping the largest number of people. It allows us to deal with things at an aggregate level. Sometimes that's a challenge when people think about their commute in very personal terms or their neighborhood and community in personal terms, and we talk about it in sort of these abstract mathematical ways. And there are some rules of thumb in the industry about utilization and productivity in this area. When I was coming up service design, I was taught anything less than 20 boardings per hour on a fixed route system. That was a good cutoff. Anything less than that should be reevaluated to be redesigned. But that was just the way I was brought up. I've seen other methods that are more akin to sort of a rank and yank formula, if you've ever dealt with sales, where you organize all your services by average productivity, and anything below the average, or maybe below 30% of average, is targeted for getting changed, fixed, redesigned, or possibly eliminated, and the resources redistributed. That's another way to do it. At the end of the day, however, every city is different, and they come up with different methods for establishing where those cutoffs and thresholds are. There is no hard and fast industry rule about it. There's a lot of rules of thumb, as I've said, and we can pick one, but we don't have an engineering standard, for example, that we can fall back on. Now, one of the important outputs of this 12 months of work is going to be for us to reestablish some level of productivity threshold and standard. Interestingly, this agency did have a productivity standard for fixed route service, starting with our service standards, and that's usually where these things were housed. It's a document from 1981 that quite clearly said anything less than 25 boardings per hour on the fixed route system needs to be reevaluated. And that served us well for many years. The service that we had for 30 years was very productive, if nothing else. In 2014, we adopted new service standards, and we completely eliminated productivity as a metric for how services would be run. That's a big step, and the timing is interesting because it coincides directly with the 5-year improvement plan. So we basically eliminated the constraint, the economic constraint on ourselves. And not surprisingly, a little while later, we began implementing a lot of low productivity services. And that in part, I think, contributed to some of the financial challenges we've had before or since then. So one of the big things that we'll need to do is reestablish in a policy form, whether at a board level or an administrative level, a cutoff for these various services, a threshold that can be transparent, that can be fair, that can be impartially administered. A lot of ways to do it, but a lot of it is subjective and will be based on the community's preferences and what we want, and frankly, how much money we have to spend. So that's something that we will be grappling with throughout the 12 months, and we will bump into it several times today. Something else we're going to bump into today, as you're going to see, some elements of today's presentation are very detailed. You're going to see maps with specific lines on them. You're going to see tables with what look like cost estimates that are really there to gauge your reaction to certain mill rate levels. That looks very specific because we're able to quantify certain elements of a long-range future even now, even at a very early stage. Other elements of this discussion are going to be frustratingly what I call fuzzy or speculative or vague. And that's also pretty natural when we talk about emerging technology, emerging markets, emerging types of service that we've never run before. So some of our conversations are going to be very specific, and some of them are going to be much more conceptual. And I hope that that will be okay. It's part and parcel to starting a long-range plan and dealing with both levels of certainty. So with that, we're going to move into our first icebreaker for the day. We excited? Woohoo! All right. You may recall last month I asked you guys, we asked a number of polling questions, and we did that again. We're going to do that again today. And I started off by asking about your priorities, and these were the opportunities you had to vote for, and these are your results from last month. I'm going to ask you to repeat this exercise because you've had a month to sort of think about it, but I'm going to change the rules on you. So I'm going to do the same exercise. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to consider your options. We're going to vote. I'm going to put a graph up, then we'll go around and discuss it. But I'm doing 2 changes. One, you don't have 3 choices anymore. You only got 2. And I've eliminated some of your options. I haven't eliminated them so much as I've consolidated some of the ends into more thematic buckets. So you still have option A, reducing environmental footprint. That's pretty much a standalone thing. But labor mobility, increasing ridership in general, really relate to either expanding the markets for people who cannot drive, whether it's due to income or mobility limitation, or attracting people out of their cars. So I'm going to kind of try to force you to pick one of those 2 options, or option A, or option E, maybe focusing on our existing riders is more important and increasing customer satisfaction. I'm also going to eliminate option G, because let's just assume that we're going to use money wisely. No matter what endeavor we pursue, let's just take that as a given. And I'm going to still let you choose option H. But I will put a caveat on it. If you choose option H and you say some version of, well, I want to have everything, I'll ask you, okay, but if you couldn't, which part of everything would you want first? Fun times, huh? Okay, does everyone understand the intent of the exercise? Choose two. You can't choose one of the ones I struck through, and yeah, I'm being mean and arbitrary when I do that. But the intent is to sort of, again, sharpen our pencil and force us to make decisions, yeah? Let me get out my trusty stopwatch here. Okay, go ahead. Meanwhile, I'm going to key up my Excel table. Let's give it another 30 seconds. Okay, are we ready? I am going to go just in the random order of people on my screen and ask you for your top two. So let's start with Kathleen.
You're a stinker. My gut was A and C.
A and C. Thank you. Kyra.
C and D.
B and D?
C and D.
C. C and D. C is in cat, D is in dog. Rich.
Same, C and D.
Raymond.
I'll join Kathleen's camp, A and C.
A and C. Roger.
C and D.
C and D. Mike.
I did decide this even before I heard all the other people say C and D.
C and D. Eric.
Well, C, and I really chose the one because I mean I'm an H, I guess, but I couldn't in 2 minutes separate the how do we reduce footprint, grow smartly, profitably, and increase satisfaction. These are they're so interrelated. I can't separate them. So I mean, in terms of what the priority is, I'll say C and E, because increasing satisfaction, I'm going to assume, is going to attract people from car owners to transit, and if we're meeting community needs by reducing footprint, So I think it all flows from how do we increase customer satisfaction, which will increase and allow us to grow profitably. So I'm going to say C and E.
All right. Jesse.
C and D.
C and D. Ryan.
Yeah, actually, I was looking for kind of a way to hit multiple things with two choices. And I was going to go C and D, kind of in line with many others here. But having heard what our chairman just said, I think I'm going to go with C and E, actually. And Eric, that was a very compelling case you just put together. So I'm going that route.
Okay. And that's part of it. Now, Forrest has his hand up, and he did send me a text asking, he wanted me to make this even harder on you and force you to rank them. And if that's what you're saying, Forrest, that ship sailed. Okay. So I think I got all the board members because Sue's not here. Did I miss anyone? Okay, I didn't. So I'm going to make up the chart here and put it on the PowerPoint, but I'm going to ask Kathleen very briefly. I think you said A and C. Do you want to tell us briefly why?
Well, again, I'm going to go, I think I understand what Eric was saying, and that was my conundrum when I was looking at these. C, most definitely, there is no doubt in my mind. Oh, we just took that away. The reason I went with A is because it's just such an integral part of discussion that we've been having for years. But I agree with Eric that if we increase our customer satisfaction, we can do that. Customers want a better environmental footprint. And if we increase customer satisfaction, it would attract car owners to transit. But I didn't see it that way. So Eric, thank you for opening my eyes. But I still really like A as well, because it's just such an important part of our future and our world moving forward.
I have so many things going on my screen right now. Thank you. Kyra, how about yourself?
Yeah, I picked C and D. I mean, I agree with Eric's argument as far as increasing customer satisfaction, but I also think, in the present, our customer satisfaction surveys have always been pretty good, and we still struggle with increasing ridership and attracting car owners to transit. So attracting car owners to transit was my choice to kind of get around you taking F away. So that accomplishes the same goal. And then, part of our ends, part of our mission as an organization is to be helpful to those in our community and be a reliable service to those in our community who rely on public transit.
Excellent, thank you. Rich, how about yourself? And by the way, I've unless I've forgotten how to count properly, you now see a graph on your screen that shows you what you said last month compared to what you just said as a group. So, Rich?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at this entire list, I view it as these have always been pretty much priorities of the board and the organization. And so I kind of took the view, and I think where Kyra's going too, like which are the ones that are kind of the biggest humps for us to get over. And so for me, the environmental footprint, I think all of us, like, we care about that, but I figured there's already a bunch of initiatives plus the Ann Arbor initiative around that. And so I kind of bumped that from my list. And then the increasing customer satisfaction, like Kyra said, like your team does an amazing job with that, right? And so it came down to this final two, which a lot of times we hear public comment, especially around C, is where we seem to hear the most issues. And it's not to say the AAA TAs and putting a ton of effort into that. It's just, it is what it is based on what we can do with routes and service availability. And then attracting car owners to transit, I think that's been a big goal of us for a long time. And I think all places, Ann Arbor can definitely benefit from that. And so it's I don't think all the effort behind that has to be on the AAA shoulders. It's just something has to be done with how we partner with the community to get them to be more willing to use the public transportation service that you have, especially as we start exploring potential micromobility services that we could offer, et cetera.
Excellent, great points. Raymond?
Yeah, so I chose A and C. Really what came to mind are kind of the, kind of representing some Ann Arbor thoughts is, the leading discussions in the community seem to be centered around equity and kind of sustainability. And I felt like C and A of the remaining choices kind of aligned with that the best. I still feel very strongly that F is my #1 pick. So, I think driving people to transit, attracting car owners to transit, and if we just come up with the best transit system we can come up with, I think riders will naturally follow. That's my hope. And so, again, this is kind of my secondary tier priorities. I think C and A is definitely reflects where I think those priorities are.
Wonderful, thank you. Roger.
Yeah, I picked C and D. Figured, and if we in D, if we attract car owners to transit, we almost certainly are going to be reducing the environmental footprint of the community as a whole. So I felt that we were addressing the environmental concerns by attracting car owners. And as far as customer satisfaction, I think if the ride is attractive enough to get people out of their cars, there's going to have to be a pretty high level of customer satisfaction. So I sort of thought if we can do D, we're going to accomplish the rest of the goals. And quite frankly, I think the community is probably going to be in trouble in the long run if we're not able to get car owners out of their cars. That it's just going to incentivize more suburban sprawl and less high density development.
The big view. Thank you very much. Mike.
I also selected C and D. C is really essential to our mission. D is very important, and as somebody else said, maybe it was just now Roger, boy, the more people we attract into public transit is going to automatically help the environment, along with increasing ridership in general, of course. I didn't select E because I focused on the word increase, because I think we're doing a good job now. And so it's not as essential to increase it as to do some of these other things.
Very good. Eric already gave us a preview of his line of thinking. You want to add to it, Eric?
Well, I mean, I'll just say that I'm looking at, whereas Roger said, hey, D will beget or beget E, I look at the opposite way. I think E will beget D. I mean, I think we could do a lot of things to attract car owners to transit right now. I mean, there's, we could give away rides for free. We could, put all the service in fixed route. But if they're not satisfied with the experience, they're not going to stay there. So customer satisfaction has to result from, can you get me where I need to go in the time I need to get there at a reasonable cost? Is it safe, et cetera? All those things we can build into customer satisfaction, and then we use that as a platform to attract car owners to transit. So you have to, I think, if you build it, they will come. And I think that starts with customer satisfaction. So I'm using E as an umbrella to say D and C and A, quite frankly. And then the other one I chose was C because, I think at the base level, if you walked up to the random person on the street and said, hey, why do we even have a transit system in this area, in this town? I think C is probably more or less the answer you're going to get. We don't exist to reduce environmental footprint. We don't exist to, attract car owners to transit. We exist at our base level to do more or less C. So that's why I chose C and E.
All right, thank you. Jesse.
So I did C and D, and I think it really is what we see is the means to achieve the end. I definitely didn't go for A because I'm actually really frightened of A as an end, because we could spend a lot of money electrifying all of our buses, and that would have a huge impact on our own personal environmental footprint, while we would be providing less service. So that's one of the things I'm really worried about, is focusing too much on environmentalism. And one of the things I'm worried about with the Ann Arbor A20 campaign is that we'll end up like with trains, spending a lot of money to do less. And then attracting, I guess I saw attracting car owners to transit. I kind of figured like we wouldn't be able to do that without increasing customer satisfaction, that unless we provide a satisfying experience, we won't be attractive. Then helping those who can't drive is a core responsibility that we have. And also, if we help people who can't drive, we are also helping everybody. There's a great truism of like, if you provide equitable service, you are not just helping the disadvantaged, you are helping everybody. If you shovel the ramp if you shovel snow off the ramp before you shovel the stairs, everyone can use the ramp. But if you shovel the stairs first, the people who have to use the ramp have to wait. So by helping the disadvantaged, you are in fact helping everybody.
Excellent points. And thank you for sharing some of the things that scare you a little bit. I think we all, the ends statement and your policies are supposed to reflect not just the things you aspire to, but the anxieties that you may have, because there is a dynamic tension there. So thank you. Ryan.
Yeah, so, C, I think, is like everyone. I just C is non-negotiable. That's just what we do. That's what we're here to do, among many other things. And I see A as kind of an end result, not to disagree too much with Jesse, but I see A as kind of an end goal, but I look at D and E as alternative routes to get to A. So with that, I think that the logic being, if we are increasing customer satisfaction, that will attract more riders, which will ultimately, settle us at A. So that's kind of my reasoning or rationale for that. Don't throw tomatoes too hard at me, please, Jesse.
That's the great thing about a virtual meeting.
I think we're actually pretty in line. D and E, I think it is like, what do you see as what is the mean and what is the end?
So this is actually where I'm hoping to open it up very briefly for a little bit of discussion, because you guys have articulated some of the important trade-offs that are inherent in the discussion. And also, I would congratulate those of you who found all the fuzziness. There is a lot of overlap here. A lot of these things will bleed into each other. No question, better customer satisfaction benefits a lot of things. But to what degree do we take it, and exactly what did we mean by customer satisfaction? Before I go on, do you guys want to discuss your various, ask your colleagues questions? What did you mean by that? Open it up for a little cross-board discussion there.
Well, if I could jump in, I did want to ask Jesse if I could ascertain as to why A is, because the word was frightening, and I'm missing it. Why? Can I ask maybe if you could share a little bit why you feel that way or think that way?
I think it's that, like, I think A is going to be a knock-on effect of attracting more people to car or away from cars to buses by making a more by encouraging people to use efficient shared services. And my fear is that if you focus on the environmental impact, and like it's there's the example that I was using, is that if we could spend a lot of our resources to electrify our fleet, and we would spend a lot of money doing that, and we actually would not be able to provide as much service, and but we would have achieved that end of reducing our environmental footprint, but we would have sacrificed the other ends of helping, basically creating a more, I guess my own personal goals of a more unified community. I'm a very strong believer in shared services,
Sure.
just from a social standpoint and also from an efficiency standpoint. So Yeah, A is very important to me, but I take it as a given if we are running an efficient service. So I just, it's not that I don't think A is important. It, to me, is actually vitally important, and it is an existential threat, an existential like to humanity. But it isn't where I would want to. It's not what I would want to have as a stated goal. Like Eric was saying, if we were, with his thing, if we were looking to attract car owners to transit, we just make it free, and maybe that will attract people, but he doesn't think that will actually achieve the long-term goals that we're looking. So it's all of these things are important, but it's more where do I want to focus resources.
No, I got you. And I wasn't trying to put you on the hot seat. Just wanted to have a little bit more conversation around that. So thank you. I hear what you're saying and why you're saying it.
Let me add, I agree with Jesse, but I see it in a little bit different way, I think. A says reducing environmental footprint. And by saying footprint, I think it focuses on just what the ride emits into the atmosphere. I think a better way of looking at it is we want to reduce the environment. We want to improve the environment, reduce carbon in this whole region. And of course, if we focus on A and interpret that, oh, well, our electric buses will do that for us because we're just looking at the ride, that's probably going to hurt the environment in our region overall because more people will be driving their cars. So I definitely wouldn't, I don't think A is a good one at all. I think that's somewhat similar to what Jesse was saying.
I echo both of them. Are we talking about reducing the environmental footprint of the ride or the region? Certainly getting people out of cars and into low emission buses is going to reduce the carbon footprint of our region a lot more than just having electric buses and fewer customers because we have reduced service. So I sort of looked at as long as we're looking at the region, attracting car drivers to transit is going to accomplish that.
I think there was as California was studying their own carbon reduction plan, the statistic I read that they said that even if the California fleet was switched over to 75% electric propulsion, I mean, like individual cars, they would still need to be I can't remember exactly, but a very substantial increase in use of public transportation in order to meet their climate goals. That changing propulsion does not actually, even in solely looking at climate, doesn't actually achieve the goals. To say nothing of the societal benefits of encouraging people to use mass transportation.
So there's a lot to unpack in that one area. I'm sure we could unpack it for the rest of the day. I think it's enough to say we've found one of those trade-offs, and the degree to which it actually becomes a trade-off is yet to be determined. But we have aspirations, hopes, and fears, so that's good. I'm just sort of keeping an eye on the clock. But were there any other facets of how you guys voted or how your votes have evolved since last month that you wanted to broach right now briefly? If not, Roger?
Just briefly say, C and D, I think, is more a question of which is the means and which is the ends. I think you could look at either one of those as accomplishing the same ultimate goal.
Definite possibility. Eric?
I was just going to ask if Raymond's sweater has an opinion or if that's just loud enough as it is.
I think it speaks for itself.
I think you're right.
I actually toned down the tint on my screen. but that's okay. I think it adds to the visual stimulation of the meeting. So that's great. Certainly my screen doesn't help. All right, great discussion. Really just, digging into the beginnings of things. So I'm going to move on with our discussion here. So again, I'm coming to the end of my section. Just a brief reminder again, we've established a lot of context. We're going to do less of that and get into the nitty gritty, getting closer to priorities, share with you some real details, spur discussion, hopefully give you some things to react to. You like this, you don't like that, what about this? Get your ideas. We'll have more questions and opportunities for you to put things on the board as we go along. Next steps in this discussion are going to be Forrest, and Forrest's going to walk you through some very detailed information about fixed route information. I'm going deep into marketing and even things that start to look like cost estimates to get your reactions to that. Brian's going to come up with, again, some important decisions that need to be made quickly, relatively speaking, but then a whole forest of future things that could become a part of our future discussions if we're interested. And then I'll come back and wrap it up and allow us time to put anything else on the board that we like. So before I turn it over to Forrest, it is the top of the hour, and I did promise you guys the potential of a break. This would seem like a good place to do it before we segue into the next thing. What would you guys say to a quick 5-minute comfort break, or would you like to press on?
Yeah, I got an Egg McMuffin over here that's calling my name, so.
Okay, tell you what, the time I have is 9:59. Let's try to reconvene at 5 past 10, and we'll turn it over to Forrest at that point. Thank you, everyone. Great warm up. Good stuff. All right, Forrest, I'm going to stop my slide share, and hopefully you can get yours up and running. All right, so we just have a few moments before we'll restart. So, okay. My timer's flipped over. I have to reconvene the class and bring everyone back in from recess. So, let's see. Okay, I hope everyone is here, just not signed on. Let's give everyone maybe another moment.
I'm here.
Ryan,
I
how's the muffin?
my wheelchair, so I'm not going to be on screen for a few minutes, but I am here.
No problem. Ryan, how's the McMuffin?
Oh, it's delectable, highly delectable.
There you go.
They know what they're doing. They know what they're doing at that McDonald's outfit.
I got to tell you, I wasn't hungry before you said that, and now I'm questioning my breakfast choices. Okay, looks like the gang is all here. I think maybe Jesse, maybe not. I'm going to go ahead, Forrest, and ask you to go ahead and get started.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Okay. My screen showing up properly? Good. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Matt, for the introduction. I appreciate you explain those, service planning, design terms, and that will be very helpful for my session in particular. Good morning, everybody. Like as Matt said, my section will focus on fixed route services. And then the PowerPoint is going to take about 20 minutes. I'm planning to spend more time on the questions, get on the discussion. But first, I will just have a quick recap of what we discussed last time. And then we're going to go through some very, very preliminary service planning and funding scenarios just for your reaction. And then we're going to start probably the most challenging part of this conversation, the reality check and questions. I want to thank Eric for his feedback last session. Going back to 25 years. So this time we went back to 20 more years. I also add a productivity trending line and just show you what happened in the last 30 years. So as we discussed last time, in the last 10 years, service grew a lot, but ridership did not, and then didn't even keep up with population growth. While we understand, there are some outside factors like gas price or income increase may have slowed down the ridership growth, but we do know the last 5-year TIP added a lot of, most of the new resources into a lower demand, for example, off-peak and the lower density areas. Of course, the success measure is not only the ridership, and then ridership is not, as Matt mentioned, that it's, related to social needs, and ridership may not be the only measurement. It could be, how we serve more people. But we didn't gain a lot of riders. That means, the resource may not be used efficiently. But anyway, so let's look at what happened in the last 30 years. So at the beginning of 90s, we've gone through service reduction and a recovery period. And then both, you look at the lines, service ridership productivity, they kind of pretty much flat during that time. And then starting from late 90s, you can tell, and then until probably 2004-ish, there was, service was expanded. But then you look at the ridership in 2004, and then after 2004 until probably 2009, 2010-ish, and that's we ridership experienced a significant increase. I mean, we probably some of you remember in 2004 we introduced MRide. You know, we brought all the students and faculties on board. Actually, U of M paying their fares, but they get a free ride. But then you look at after 2009 until, you know, we finish our service expansion, the ridership had a slight increase, but not much. But the service was up a lot. I mean, if you look at the purple productivity line, it is, you know, it's 90s, it was pretty much flat, and it went down a little bit with some service expansion in around 2000. And of course, with the MRide, it went up a lot because we didn't increase service, but we got a lot of more riders. But after, you know, the service expansion started, the productivity went down. We add more services, but it was, you know, much less ridership increase. But anyway, so look at what happened in the last 30 years, as probably Matt mentioned as well. MRide did give us a great opportunity to expand our market to students and employees of the U of M. But during the 5-year expansion, I think the ridership didn't go up greatly, but we probably served more social needs, expanded the service area. I mean, we pretty much, and by now, when you think about the service change in the last 30 years or the service we had pre-pandemic, you know, I mean, the market on the, I call it traditional transit market, you know, for those people who have no other transportation options and they rely on transit as their day-to-day transportation. And I think that market, we have been serving that market pretty well. And also the student market and maybe the commuter market within our service area in our reach. But again, you know, what's next? After the last 5-year expansion, we didn't get as much riders increase, I mean, as we probably hoped. But we're looking at what's the next potential market. As we talked about before, we can look at again, you know, is that commuter market coming into the job centers in Ann Arbor, or more like seniors, where have an aging population, or maybe a regional riders or something else. So let's look at, for the next few slides, and you know, we talk about, you have seen that before. I'm just gonna have a quick going over and just making sure, remind you, you know, what we talked about before. So this slide is basically showing the commuter patterns in and out Ann Arbor. You know, as we all know, Ann Arbor is a big job center, but as you can tell, majority of workers or employees don't live in the city. But in the future, Ann Arbor will continue to be a growing job center, and also, as you can tell, probably a potential market for transit as well. But you know, when we talk about cross boundary service, it might be a little bit harder to reach, and due to some complication, you know, agreement with different municipalities. But if you look at the numbers here, I mean, for over 80,000 people commute every day into the city, even just 1% of that market share will give us, I would say, roughly 400,000 trips a year. That's about a 6% our pre-pandemic ridership. So 1% market share will provide us like ridership increase about 6%. So of course, you know, if you look at this is only for Ann Arbor. We didn't include Ipsen area, and that does not seem to become a job center by 2045. But as we all know, many people living in Ypsi and working in Ann Arbor. So there's a market right there. So, and that's another map we saw last time, called Opportunity Index Map, developed by Washington County. This map basically tells us the major needs, I mean, on the social side, are concentrated in the Southeast area. And this is the part that we expand service during the 5-year service, 5-year TIP. So there are certainly some needs in this area, but again, you know, given the service ridership patterns in the last 5-6 years, we did serve more areas, but the ridership increase, more focused on this area, but not as much as we hoped. But anyway, so in the other thing I want to mention here, I think that the Ypsi area is more aligned with Ann Arbor from the job perspective. But however, the access to more jobs in West Wayne County may also provide some opportunities for those people. But again, unlike Ann Arbor, there's no concentrated job centers in West Wayne County. It's going to be challenging to provide this direct connection. But again, you know, let's look at, I mean, in the detailed service design, we'll look at those service design components. And then this map shows the population job increase by 2045. The main growth area in the region, I would say, you know, there's Livingston County and Oakland County and West Wayne County and also Detroit, but a lot of increase within Washington County, and then including our service area, including just, you know, the area just south and north our service area. So the job is kind of growing in a similar pattern. The key points here on this slide, you know, our traditional market are growing, but slowly, I would say probably less than 1% a year in terms of population growth. But around the area around our service, like for example, Peaceville Township, Scioto, Superior, they have a much faster growing in the next 20-25 years. Of course, you know, as you can tell, there might be some potential for the local or regional commuters here. So you've probably seen this map before. This is a, you know, population density map, but it basically just tells us in the service area was about 200,000 people, and it's not large. There's not a huge transit market, but we got some urban development, you know, higher density along certain corridors in certain neighborhoods. But again, there are a lot of areas with a lower density. It's just kind of it's much harder and more expensive to serve. Again, you know, we all know the population growth is not significant for the next 25 years. But as we all talking about in the past, affordable housing continue to be an issue in Ann Arbor. More job growth in the future, but that means more people will commute on a daily basis. So how to address that becomes a big challenge. And the other thing is uneven growth is also leading to some social tension and probably uneven opportunities for transit. So this is just to show the aging population. The key message here, in our service areas or within the Washington County, you know, we probably by 2045 will have 60% more seniors living in our service area. But again, you know, seniors market is growing. Is that going to be a potential market, or could become a more social need? But other way is you know, a segment of transit market. But if we consider the commuter market during the peak hours, so then the seniors market may be more like off peak, you know, for example, during the midday. So it could be a perfect mix if we design some services. We can, you know, we can attract those both markets. for just strictly from the equipment utilization perspective. But however, in the past, seniors haven't been a large portion of our ridership. So attracting more seniors could be an ongoing challenge. Matt has talked about a lot about relating, supply and demand on the market. So we want to match the supply to the demand. But the other thing I want to mention here is the limits. We need to understand our limits. I think Matt also talked about we have limited resources financially, or even just strictly from a capacity, like a physical capacity. For example, our garage, terminal, and the organizational capacity as well. So how we can allocate our resource to focus on most, in this case, I call it a profitable market, but it's not, that's a commercial term. But I would say in our case, so where we can serve most people. I think Matt talked about a lot about this, and basically meeting most needs with our limited resources. But where we need to understand where those markets are or where those needs are. But of course, we can also focus our resource to address those limits, like remove those limits. For example, adding more capacity at the garage or terminal or organizational capacity as well. So in that case, of course, we need more funding source. But clearly, as we talk a lot today, defining our priorities is critical, especially we're working under those constraints. But let's this is just look at from the service design perspective. So as last time we reviewed some essential service elements and some optional or potential improvements. So this is our base service, and basically just the existing service. Plus we have to address some financial challenges. We all know, like some operational issues such as on-time performance, and some base service increase just to meet the population growth and the job growth, and also aging population. The other thing, some essential components on this map is the more garage space and more terminal space. So last time we reviewed, there is a potential service improvement. Again, those are just based on what we heard, based on what we know from the past, from stakeholders, from riders. But again, look at this. We talk about some potential BRT lines, those red lines, and the blue lines represent high frequency corridors. And we also talk about options for BRT corridors. Could be just full BRT with dedicated bus lanes, or the BRT light version, with queue jump lanes, signal priority, or something very, just to enhance the service, like an overlay express service on the local portion. And of course, the base service improvement in the local, in terms of the coverage or frequency as well. And then we talk about this, the commuter market. In this case is, park and ride express service. And plus the regional connection, including a portion from YTC to West Wing County for some potential job access. But again, this is designed more moving commuters in and out Ann Arbor. As we discussed before, and the city of Ann Arbor has a very ambitious goal to achieve, let's say, 20% transit share for the commuter market. But we probably, my estimate would be, we only have like 2-3% today. By carrying people from EPC or Peaceville, SIO, or some from park and ride facilities into the city, downtown area or U of M campuses. But again, in order to achieve that 20% mode share, and then which is by 2030, that means we need to double our services, double our ridership. But I say it's very ambitious because it took us almost 40 years to double our ridership last time. So we're talking about in 10 years. And when we're talking about the level of investment, I think it will be beyond what we can afford through a millage vote. But again, it doesn't mean it can, there could be other funding resources, but we can talk about a little bit later. But those, the Park and Ride Express services also require the cooperation across different jurisdictions and the arrangement with the big employers such as the U of M. But from the other perspective, Matt mentioned the RTA, commuter rail type thing, but is this really our function or is the RTA function? There are probably potential some discussions, when RTA go out for a millage vote in 2022. If that got approved, so where those funds being allocated, I think this probably a potential service component for those regional funds. Last time we had a couple of questions. I just want to recap. So we did ask you, between kind of a ridership and coverage question. So it seems like we have a consensus for this question. Basically, the board members want us to focus on intensify service in existing service area other than expand geographically. Then the second question we asked is about it still related to ridership and coverage, but more, with more services where we put those resources on. So I think the most people answered C, or even people answered E. I think their point with their comments is kind of leaning towards C and between C and D. So the basic message here is increase tax rate, but add more resources on ridership, but also at a minimum keep the social needs, continue meeting the social needs, and while probably have some sort of improvement there as well. So like Matt mentioned, we're going to show you some details and maybe lines on the maps, but this is purely for discussion only. I mean, just for to get some of your reaction. The scenarios we kind of separate from a low, medium, and high investment. But again, it's based on what we heard, based on what we talked about last time, some potential service improvement. We kind of assembled those to different scenarios. But again, the consultants is in the early stage. They're going to do a lot of more comprehensive analysis and getting feedback from you and from other stakeholders, including riders. Hopefully, after their detailed analysis, they can come out a lot of different scenarios. That's my hope. And then they're going to bring back those scenarios to you and to the public. Hopefully to you in the summer, and to public probably in the fall. But let's look at those maps. This is a kind of a low investment scenario. Of course, those you can tell they're red lines representing higher order transit corridors. The dark blue represent high frequency corridors, and then there's regional service, the light blue, and there's the light green line representing Park and Ride Express lines. And then there are also local service coverage and with a flex ride on demand type service in the surrounding area. So this low investment option, as you can tell, we still have 3 higher order corridors, 3 red lines, but those only represent express service overlaid on the local, basically enhance the service for those corridors. And then we have 2 high frequency corridors on Packer and Jackson, Huron. And also for the Park and Ride Express, I basically put in additional 1,000 more parking spaces. So plus 8 more buses to serve those parking lots. And it will be required, even if we fill the bus all the time, and we'll need at a minimum 7-8 buses to serve 1,000 parking spaces. So then we assume a continue the regional connection D2A2, and also the airport link. The other thing included on this scenario was additional 5 more buses to improve the local services, other frequency or coverage or meeting other needs. And then there's better weekend service on this scenario as well. One thing I want to mention, we do, I know Brad is going to talk about a lot of A-Ride, but just for the cost from the strictly from budget cost perspective, I include about a 1/3 of A-Ride increase in this package as well. So that's scenario 1, and then let's look at scenario 2. And as you can tell, the lines are getting thicker or darker. That means more services. So for TheRide lines, so those are BRT light version, which means we'll have signal priorities, queue jump lanes, and then basically a lot more investment, physical investment in this scenario. And plus we have a more blue lines, dark blue lines, high frequency corridors. As you can tell, we have 4 included in this scenario. And then the regional connection will be enhanced. And then there's a more park and ride spaces and more buses to serve park and ride. And in this case, it's 2,500 additional parking spaces. And we'll have, again, 10 more buses on the local service improvement. And including this package, also have expanded service hours, longer service hours, and the better weekend service. On the A-Ride service in this package, I assume 2/3 of the A-Ride increase. So going through the last scenario, this is a high investment. So the lines getting darker again. So those are full BRT services. That will cost us about a $10 to $15 million per mile investment. And of course, a lot better services too. So the more lines for high frequency corridors and the more parking spaces for the park and ride express service. So I assume the 5,000 parking and plus 40 buses for express buses serving those parking lots. And then there's a regional connection. There's also, I forgot to mention the medium investment also include the regional connection from Ypsi to West Wayne County, and the same as this investment scenario. So more local buses as well, and of course better weekend, late night service, expanded service hours, and there will be like double A-Ride service in this package. Also include some, more stop and terminal amenities. So those are kind of 3 very high level scenarios. Before we look at the cost estimate, I just want to go through quickly some assumptions we have made for this cost estimate. But again, it's just for discussion purpose only. Even for those assumptions, it's very high level. Like I said, the consultants will dig into more details and develop a more financial and funding analysis. So on the capital side, I basically assume federal and state will share 50%, and the rest will be covered by local property tax. And then on the operating expenses, I assume basically maintain the existing share from federal, state. And the federal revenue, I did assume there's a ridership increase, like a productivity increase, we'll get more fare revenue. The current fare revenue account for about 14%. And there's a local property share for the rest. And strictly for the millage, I know when we talk about millage, there are like 3 different, maybe more different millage. This is talking about the entire service area. The millage is 0.7 we asked through the last 5-year TIP. So for each mill, we can get around $7 million in our budget. But I give you an example, use the Park and Ride Express. I keep talking about, parking, how many parking spaces or how many buses. But for each 1,000 parking spaces, we need probably for construction costs about $5 million. But again, we can lease from existing, like for example, some mall, from some grocery stores, and they have some spare parking lot. We can lease from them. But I think eventually the cost could be similar. But for, like I mentioned, for each 1,000 parking spaces, we need a minimum 7 buses plus 1 spare. So that will cost us $4 million. And then for annual operating costs, in order to operate that 7 buses, each year we need to spend about $2 million there. And then I kind of annualize the construction cost, the bus cost, for the 12-year service lifespan for buses, 25-year for parking. Anyway, so come out annualized total cost is $2.8 million. So the local portion, after all these assumptions, the local portion is about $1.3 million. That equivalent, as 1 million, 1 mil equivalent to $7 million. So that $1.3 million equivalent to roughly 0.2 mil. So that's kind of how the cost estimate being developed. But as I mentioned before, for each 1,000 spaces, let's assume we can attract 1,000 cars. Of course, we may attract more than 1,000 people. But in this case, just to keep it simple, we would add 1,000 people on our services. So the ridership increase represent about 7% for each 1,000 parking spots. So as market share is about a 1.2% transit market share. Anyway, so based on those assumptions, let's look at some very, very high level cost estimate based on the service package we put together. For the low investment scenario, so there's the total capital cost will be over $100 million. Of course, as we talk about, the garage alone will cost more than $50 million. And then there's a 2-terminal expansion. There's a lot more buses and then parking spaces as well. So the total annual operating cost would be $15 million. And then turn that to, use the annualized cost, turn that a millage, mill rate will be between 2.0 and 2.5. And under the medium investment scenario, about a $200 million capital cost and then over $30 million annual operating, and the mill rate will be at 3.5 to 4. And again, for high scenario, will be over $300 million capital cost and over $40 million operating cost, and the mill rate will be 5 to 5.5. Again, when we talk about the mill rate, that definitely, for each package, we can go out and seek for other funding opportunities. Things that I can think about, ways we can improve the productivity, even attract more riders and get more road fare revenue. Or I think especially talking about park and ride facilities. So there will be reduced, downtown parking or UVM parking, infrastructure investment, or probably, reduce the roadway investment. But again, how to shift the funding from one area to the other is going to be very challenging. But again, it does not stop us to find those funding opportunities. But this is a very high level. The inflation does not include it here, but just for give you a rough idea how much is going to cost when we talking about a service. Relate to the cost to the service element. All right, so now it's going to, there's, I have a 3 sets of questions to ask you. And the first set is related to ridership productivity and cost recovery. I think Matt has explained the cost recovery, but I will just kind of reiterate the cost recovery is not alone is not going to be the measure of success, because that, gaining profit is not our goal. But again, it does matter to some degree, how much we get from the local tax dollars, how much we get from federal state funding, and how much can be covered by the federal revenue for the service expansion. But I'm gonna probably, and those are just very, I hope there are simple questions. This is 5 short one, but you only need to answer yes or no for each one.
Hey,
Sorry,
Forrest,
Matt. Yep.
sorry to interrupt. I wanted to know, I'm wondering if perhaps we should pause for just a second before you get into the poll and see if any board members have questions about that huge amount of work that you just provided. I think there's a lot there to unpack, and it might be good to just pause and see if anybody has any questions about that.
Yeah, I guess I'll just jump in and say, I'm not sure if I've, we just got the materials last night. We're getting kind of the initial rundown by Forrest. Maybe other board members feel more comfortable with what Forrest just went through. I mean, I would have to, I'd to use, I hate using the word marinate or noodle or whatever, but I mean, I'd have to spend more time with it than I think we've got here to think about the low, medium, high investment and what that would take to do any of those. I think I could answer these quick poll questions just kind of as a really initial gut reaction. But to really, and I think knowing this board, we're going to really want to get into some of the real details of this thing, both and explore these in both maybe service committee level or somewhere else, and have more debate about it. And I know this is just kind of a thought starter, initial kind of thing. I would probably, I'm just beginning to really formulate a lot of the questions that I would have that we would need to get to the kind of the trade-off between low, medium, high, and what the benefit is versus what appears to be really substantial increase in cost to do that, and the feasibility of the whole thing is just, I don't have my questions really mapped out in a really formulaic way, but I'm just really starting to put my head around the real implications of what Forrest just gave us. So I'm not sure I can comment now. We may have to marinate and talk a little bit, but if other board members have specific questions about the data we just got, please jump in. I'm trying to formulate some of the bigger strategic questions in my head while we get going. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think I pretty much agree with what Eric just said. And for example, to really contemplate these questions, also need to understand some of the things that Forrest has put up. In particular, you go back to that last required investment schedule, Forrest. Total capital costs or total annual operating costs, are these incremental to kind of our levels today, or are these total? And are these totals for 25 years? Because I understand we're really looking at a 25-year time horizon here. So I want to understand this schedule a lot better than.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question, Mike. Sorry for missing that part. This is incremental.
Okay.
On top of what we already have. So roughly, I would say for the low, so the low investment scenario, we have a roughly about a 50% of service increase. For the medium one, we have a roughly 100 and 220% increase. And for the high one, we have about 150% cost, the service increase. So that's kind of give you probably a better idea. For the total capital cost, total annual operating costs, those are all incremental. The mill rate is total, including that 0.6 or 7 we already have. So when we go out for millage ask, we need to ask this much in order to cover the each scenario. And this is for 2045. Like I said, the inflation was not taken into consideration here, but this is purely give you some ideas. If we increase service today, we need this much more services, more service hours, more buses, and we need to go out ask a mill rate at this this kind of range for each scenario.
Okay. If I just understood you, Forrest, the total capital and the annual operating costs are incremental, but the millage is incremental? No, total, excuse me.
Right.
So in other words, the low millage is 2 mils to 2.5 mils, and that's total, not incremental. We have the 0.7 that the voters voted on. Is there any kind of a base millage in there too, or is the total 0.7? If that went away, there'd be no property taxes funding? Am I understanding that's correctly?
We have in Ann Arbor, I think we have a 2 point something, the permanent millage. In EFC, we have roughly, I think, a 1.0. And those are, I believe they're permanent as part of the city budget. But the 0.7 is the mill rate we need to go out every 5 years. And for,
right.
Yeah.
So actually the total mill rate depends on where you live. These are just on top of whatever that base is. Is that
right? That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, just so I'm clear about that. This total at millage ask is total mill rate ask,
That's
which would incorporate the 0.7.
Right.
okay.
So
Thank
we're
you.
talking about either a 1.3 to 1.8
Additional.
ask, an additional ask. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we
That's
would
right.
be saying voters give us, we currently have 0.7, we now want 2.2 or something like that.
That's correct. Yes.
Got it.
Thank
And
you.
I'm going to jump in and, this information we discussed, whether it's frankly distracting and premature, but we wanted to give you guys order of magnitude ideas about what it would take to push the envelope and really expand services again. So I hope we don't get too caught up on specific math because it's all going to change as we go through the process. I think the important things here are just the general scale. And I didn't mean to disrupt Forrest's tightly timed polling questions either, but I thought it was important you guys had a chance to ask some clarification.
I guess one thing that, this is just one kind of very big picture and unanswerable question, but if the RTA or any kind of regional thing becomes a reality, I don't, well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to make a conclusion, but I won't do that yet. But we have to consider how a regional plan might affect us in this whole thing, which is unanswerable at this point. But and I don't want to draw any conclusions right now and spit something out there. But that's just one kind of big picture thing that we got to think deeply about.
You are correct.
While we're talking about funding, I had one question about your assumptions regarding fare revenue. Was that using the existing fare structure, or were you making some assumptions about adjustments with like fare increases, fare streamlining, things we've talked about with the fare study?
Right. No, Jesse, that's a good question. We didn't consider any, fare structure adjustment or anything here because we're very, very high level. Basically, just assume there's more riders riding based on the existing fare revenue. We're gonna have more fare revenue, like cost recovery. Yeah, that's all we made. Very high level estimate.
Are any potential changes that we had considered with the fare study, would that have a significant impact on the fare revenue, ridership aside?
I don't believe so.
It's not going to be a game changer. We might see marginal improvement in cost recovery, but it's not going to be a funding source for a major way.
Roger?
Yeah. Well, Forrest and I have already discussed some things on fixed route service, and I don't want to get into that other than I'm not convinced that the schematics are showing are necessarily the only approach. They may be, but I'm not convinced of that yet. I am a little concerned about the BRT light scenario in that I remember talking with the consultants on this route. And to me, if we're going to actually get people out of their cars and increase ridership, we're going to have to make our service fast or faster than an automobile, because that's what's going to attract car drivers. I mean, our cost is always going to be dramatically less than owning a car and parking it anywhere in the center core. And a car is always going to be more convenient and comfortable than a bus. So time is really to me, the key issue of getting travel time down to being less than an automobile commute. And my concern with Washtenaw BRT, I asked the consultants what the time savings was on Washtenaw BRT light. And they said I think it was a 9-minute reduction in travel time. And this is a $30 million project. I said, well, do you get that through queue jumping or signal prioritization? They said, no, we just eliminated, the time savings come from eliminating bus stops. So, you could, the project of BRT Light doesn't really increase travel time unless it actually lengthens it if you're farther away from a bus stop that is, if you lost a bus stop near you, and it's shorter if you're near one. But I'll leave it at that I have concerns about that, and I'll take up my larger concerns of the scenarios with Forrest and that.
Thanks, Roger.
Forrest, I suggest you put him on the hot seat, and to Eric's point, we're going to have to discuss this ongoing and iteratively over the next year. So this is certainly not a decision. We're not asking you to make a decision, and Forrest's numbers are far too preliminary, as detailed as they are, and he has done an excellent job. We're not asking you to make a commitment. We're just trying to take the temperature, see where your heads are at the moment. So with that, Forrest, let's, because I'm cognizant of time, why don't we move into your questions?
Okay. All right. Unless there are, you have questions about my questions. Otherwise, I hope those are straightforward, and you can just read the questions and answer yes or no. And probably I'm going to give you like 3 minutes on this one, and then I'll come back and
Hey, Forrest, I just have a clarifying question, if I may.
Sure, yep.
On number 5, the implication or the insinuation is more profitable, but just to clarify, these are not profitable, right? Vanpool, Regional, Park and Ride Express, these present kind of different operational challenges, but they're by no means self-sufficient. Right. Is that a fair assumption?
One pool, I have to say, probably you can consider as a profitable, but the other two is just a higher cost recovery. Yeah, but that's, okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And Forrest, I've consumed a little bit of your time, but I'm cognizant of giving Brian enough time that we don't get jammed up on the back end. So I will encourage you to move expediently through your questions, get more feedback so we can keep moving. Thank you. And I want to make sure everyone gets another break.
Sounds good. It looks like everybody's ready. I'm just gonna go around my screen here. Maybe I'll start with Roger.
Okay. Are we going to do all three polls here? Fourth? You want me to answer all three polls or just the first one?
Oh, just for the first one, please.
One, okay. On one, I'd say no. On two, no. On three, yes. On four, yes. And five, no.
Okay, thanks, Roger. And then go to Kathleen.
I'm number 1, no. Number 2, no. Number 3, yes. Number 4, yes. Number 5, yes.
Thank you. And Jesse?
Number 1, no. Number 2, yes. Number 3, yes. Number 4, qualified, yes. And number 5, no.
Thank you. And then Eric?
1, no. 2, no. 3, yes. 4, not sure. And 5, probably. I'll say 4, I'm not sure because to me, there's no point with going a low-cost alternative where feasible if it's going to decrease our customer satisfaction and lead to, therefore, a decrease in ridership. So, there's a cost-benefit trade-off to be made there that is behind that question that I can't answer with just a simple yes, no. 5's a probably, but again, that assumes that we won't lose a decrease in customer satisfaction by going on the more profitable one that provides a greater cost recovery. So that's a qualified yes for 5.
Okay, thank you, Eric. That's a good point. Rich?
1, I said no. 2, I said yes, but with a caveat that it would be temporary or maybe even income tiered. 3 was a yes. 4 was a yes. And then 5, I had to flip a coin because I think with others, I just need more information. So I actually put no with a question mark.
Okay. Thank you. And Raymond?
Yeah, Kathleen is apparently my muse today, so I'm following in her. So 1, no. 2, no. 3, 4, 5, yes.
Thank you. Mike?
I won't give any specific comments because each one might have a qualification, but 1 no, 2 no, 3 yes, 4 yes, 5 no.
Okay. Do you want to give your comments right now?
No, I don't think we're going to have time if we do that.
Okay. Maybe I can reach out to you to get more feedback on that. Ryan?
Yeah, so I'm going to do 1 no, 2 yes, 3 yes, 4 yes, 5 yes. And with 2, I also like to echo, I think, what Rich said about there maybe being some caveats with income-based needs and so forth.
Okay. Thank you. Kyra?
1 no, 2 no, 3, 4, and 5 are all yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Maybe I will move quickly. I can share this result. Maybe either via email or maybe later if we have a little bit more time. So move to next set of questions. Those are kind of related to threshold, where we change our direction or change some decision-making point. I noticed maybe some of you already done this question. Are you ready to provide your answer now, or do you want another minute or two? Okay, I see some up. Maybe just give it 1 minute.
Can you clarify number 3? I'm not sure I understand the question very well.
Oh, it's more, for example, if Matt mentioned that there's a service standard about, 20 boardings per hour for a fixed route. But in this case, let's say a bus going out and do a half-hour loop only carry 2 people. So that half hour will cost us $50. So for 2 rides, and per ride, the cost is going to be $25 per ride. So if we can call a cab for that rider at a lower cost, like $20, we probably still save $5. Does that make sense? Okay, good. All right. I think I look around. It seems most of you are ready. I will start with Roger again. So.
I'll just say yes to all 3.
Thank you. And I'm going with Jesse. Can I hear you, Jesse?
Oh, sorry. Yes, yes, no.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
Yeah, I mean, all 3 of those I mean, I have to qualify all 3 of them, but just for the sake of this, to keep it moving, I'm with Jesse, yes, yes, no, but all 3 of those have qualifications for me.
Okay. Thank you. Kathleen?
I'm a yes, yes, no as well.
Thank you. Rich?
This is a tough one for me, but I'm just going to follow the crowd and go with yes, yes, no, because the ones that were maybes were closer to the yeses anyways.
Okay, thank you. Raymond?
Yeah, these 3 questions are a little harder for me, but I would probably follow Jesse, Eric, Kathleen, and I think Rich, yes, yes, no, if I had to pick.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
No, yes, yes, and I guess I better make a comment on number 1 because I'm contrary to most
Right.
other people. By adding more service, it means you got to take it away from someplace else to have more revenue, and I'm assuming not doing either. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, thanks. Kara?
I'm going to go with yes, yes, no also.
Thank you. Ryan?
Yes, yes, yes.
All right, thanks. Okay, we're gonna move on to next question. This is gonna be a very quick one, I guess. But this one is a little bit different. Other than choose one, I ask you to rank all 3. So which one comes first, and then second, and the third? Okay, maybe I will start with Roger.
We go A, C, D.
Thank you. Kathleen? Are you
I'm the
ready?
same, A, B, and C, in that order that you have it.
A, B, and C. Good. Thank you. Eric?
A, B, C, in that order.
Thank you. Rich?
A, B, and C.
Oh. Jesse?
Definitely A. I can't decide between B and C. Would reducing service also mean like changing service, like moving to A-Ride kind of stuff like we did with the, I'll just say ACB. ACB.
Okay, thank you. Raymond?
Right in the order you have them, A, B, C.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
A, C, B, and let me just mention, I put B last because of my doubts on whether increasing fares would necessarily increase revenue because we might lose riders.
Right. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Ryan?
Well, yeah, I'm going with ABC.
Thank you. Kyra?
ABC for me also.
All right, thanks. Well, sorry for, I guess, my my portion is more like probably a lot more details. As Matt said, these are just very high level to try to get your reaction. I know we have a limited time, but feel free if you have additional comments you want to share, and just send me an email, or we can regroup later and try to get more feedback from you. But really appreciate your time. Thanks. I'm going to pass on to Brandon.
And I'm going to jump in. Forrest's last slide, actually, I have a short wrap up at the end after you hear from Brian, and maybe that's for the sake of time where we'll pick your brains. You were really drinking from a fire hose with Forrest's presentation, and I appreciate your interest in those details. I'm actually thinking that as a thought exercise, this may be a good follow-up discussion at the board meeting to sort of maybe play with these ideas a little bit more. So I'll ask Forrest maybe to tabulate some of the survey results he got just now. And if we have time, maybe at the end of this meeting, maybe he can share those results, or we can kick the whole discussion into a future board meeting. But at this point, just for the sake of time, what I'm going to suggest is another 5-minute break while Brian gets set up, and then get into that section. And I'm sorry, Brian, we're eating a little bit into your time, but I hope we can make it work still with 45 minutes or so. So unless there's any objections, I suggest we give it 5 minutes, which would be 11:15 by my clock. Does that work for everyone? Seems good. Thank you all very much. These are tough questions, but this is, what governance and leadership is about, difficult choices. So with that, we'll see you all in about 5 minutes, and Brian, go ahead and get set up. Thank you. Good work for us. Thank you.
Keith, or Mike, since I see you're here, does this show up as full screen, or does it show up with a large black bar at the top and bottom?
It shows up with a large black bar at the top and the bottom.
Okay,
Right.
let's see if we can fix that. Does that fix it?
Yes, it does.
Excellent. Okay. Well, camera just a little bit.
Okay, we're going to give it another few moments and then we'll get restarted as soon as everyone's here. But oh, literally seconds.
And just a reminder, I will have to duck out at 11:30 sharp, so I'll probably just disappear at that point in the meeting.
Thanks for the reminder. We are recording the session and we shared the first one with the consulting team. They found it very useful. I think this one will be even more useful. And if any of you want to review the recording or catch up, Jesse, we certainly can make that happen. All right, if everyone's back, I'd like to go ahead and get started. We got some empty cameras. There's Mike. I'm hoping Rich, Kyra, Raymond, you guys, there's Rich. Boy. There's Kathleen's puppy. Hello, puppy. So I hope Kyra and Raymond are here. Can't see them, however. They say that time is relative, and certainly during quarantine, it's more relative than at other times. So, okay, we got Raymond back. I will say, Brian, for the sake of time, let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And board members, this is something that I truly love talking about in particularly the long-term section. So if I get a little preachy or overly excited, just give me a calm it down a little bit. For today's presentation, we've got two main buckets to consider. What do we do over the next 2 to 5 years in that short term? And then what do we do going out 25 years? And first, we're going to talk about the short term and how we have proposed to address our immediate challenges that were outlined in the paratransit study. Get your feedback on that ever so briefly. And then we're going to talk about the long term, which frankly is what gets me excited. There are quite a few possibilities that I believe could really take off in our community, and I look forward to sharing them with you. And now I hope to get my presentation to work. There we go. So over the next 2 to 5 years, we're grappling with immediate post-pandemic issues, but still have the budget issues we had before the pandemic. And we have a need to set a goal for a millage next year. And so in the short term, we have two more buckets again, service levels and eligibility for service. And just a brief recap from my presentation at the last retreat. Both of those buckets affect these cost slides, eligibility and service level. Purchase transportation, which is what is represented here, is the largest growth item in the budget year after year, especially following the 5-year TIP, where we greatly expanded the reach of our door-to-door service. And one note that this number includes all contracted service. So there's Vanpool, FlexRide, AirRide is in there, but A-Ride does represent the largest portion of this. And we had unaffordable trends. Please note the data is from 2019, so it's out of date for 2020. We did not actually spend $11 million on purchase transportation in 2020, but it does represent unsustainable growth if left unchanged. And to put service levels into context, I'd like you to consider this diagram. We currently exceed the ADA minimums in several ways, both in service level and eligibility requirements, even during the pandemic level of service that we have right today. And that, I should be clear, is temporary. Currently suspended are the two larger circles of same-day ADA and Gold Ride. Because they were operated by the same company with the same fleet, however, there were not clear lines like you see in this diagram as to what was required, what we provided, and then what was expected. And that was one of the major points brought up in the paratransit study, was that we didn't have this clear line definition of what we were obligated to do and what we were doing as really be above and beyond. And that led to difficulties and high expense. So the other trouble that we had with those services is that they weren't, it wasn't aligned like this. They weren't just all inclusive, and I know that we have members of the board who actually know this personally. So Gold Ride was available for seniors over the age of 65, but without any regard for ability or income. So the multimillionaire that lives in downtown Ann Arbor that runs marathons was eligible for Gold Ride and able to get a $4 subsidized taxi trip anywhere within Ann Arbor. However, it was only available within Ann Arbor and some small portions of Pittsfield Township, and it was not available throughout our service area. This is at least inequitable, if not outright illegal. Now, GoldRide had been in existence for a long time. It predated the 5YTIP at Ypsilanti and Ypsilanti Township joining the authority. And one of the questions I'll be asking shortly is if we should continue to offer subsidized taxi service to a population without regard to income or ability. And same-day ADA was also available, but almost exclusively for people who didn't use a mobility device. If you used a wheelchair, for example, you often could not get same-day rides. This was both inequitable and a clear violation of the federal requirements for equal access. We are allowed to set, we're not obligated to offer same-day ADA service, but if we do offer it, we have to offer it universally across the board. So the paratransit study, as I was examining this, pointed out that most transit systems that allow same-day service do so either on an as-available basis or to utilize a separate premium service operated by private vendors. And so this is the final adjustment to that diagram. And I would say that this would allow TheRide to maintain a defined service level with predictable and somewhat controllable costs that meet federal regulations and frankly, somewhat beyond. I would say that the ADA minimums are not a level of service that I believe I've heard the board talk about that they would want to have us put out in the industry. It is not a very user-friendly level of service. So I would say we would want to be beyond that ADA minimum no matter what. And then premium services can be completely separate. They can be provided at a different cost, so we can charge a different fare. They can be provided with a different subsidy or no subsidy at all. And it can be done without any confusion as to what is required, because over here on this side, we've said, this is what we're doing to meet our obligations to the federal government and to equal access. And then we have the premium services. When we get to the long-term section of this presentation, I will say this is where some of the interesting bits are. So with that, we come to our first quick poll. But before, and I'm going to ask you to just read these and listen to me as I describe some of them, because I put a number of caveats throughout these questions, and I want to give you some context for these questions. And I say, keep existing LOS, that's the level of service. And that's where the first little footnote comes in. And I would say that existing service at a minimum would have to be brought into compliance with federal regulations for equal access. Frankly, I don't believe Matt would be meeting his executive limitations if we didn't. And certainly the FTA would find fault with it. I would also recommend that our service level be equal across our service area. So if we kept the existing level of service, that existing level of service should be accessible throughout our service area. The second question includes an asterisk that it's that we would keep existing level of service for demand response, but increase the millage to pay for it. And I'll be honest, I don't have the breakdown of numbers like Forrest did, because this is when we're talking about this level of service and this topic, there's a lot more fuzziness that Matt mentioned at the beginning of this board retreat. So I will say that it is unlikely that over the long term, we could increase a millage enough to cover the cost of pre-pandemic demand response service levels. This is why we had been ramping up a public input campaign in the beginning of 2020 to implement some of the changes recommended by the paratransit study. I had presented to you all about the paratransit study. The pandemic forced our hand with that decision temporarily. And I want to stress that particularly for anybody who's listening. We are committed to the fact that the services that we have suspended are absolutely temporary. We are going out to the public right now to seek input on making those changes permanent. But I would ask for your feedback on, is that something where we could increase the millage and try to maintain a level of service that we had pre-pandemic. And then the final asterisk on the third question is adopting cost control measures and still increase the millage, even to cover A-Ride costs as it is planned to start this August. It is not without its budget limitations. So more than likely, we would need to still increase the millage just to a lower amount. And I would say that it's more likely that we would be able to include in that portion of the millage enough to cover those costs, as opposed to the question above, where frankly, it might be difficult to do so. So with that, I think I've talked long enough for everybody to kind of give me an idea of what they're thinking about for an answer. And I need to figure out, there we go, to poll everybody here. So I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to ask for your answers. We'll tally it, and then I would think that we would want to continue these discussions as we move forward. For the short term, please also keep in mind that our public input process for the August service changes is absolutely another place where we're going to hear back from the public, and we would have an opportunity to hear from the board multiple times over what they think of our August 2021 service changes. And so with that, I'm just going to go with the way the computer organized everybody on my screen and start, Mike, with you, if I may.
Okay, I would say no on 1 and 2. Number 3, maybe I need to understand that one more fully. I'll say a definite maybe, but leaning toward no without better understanding.
Okay. Chairman Molly.
1 is no, 2 is no, because I don't think it's politically feasible to get that. I just don't think that's going to resonate. And 3, no. So I'm no, no, no.
Okay. Roger. Seems like Roger might have frozen in my screen. So I'm going to skip and go to Kathleen.
So knowing that this is a quick poll, and that I don't have all the information, I am inclined to go number 1, no, number 2, yes, with a caveat, I need more information, and number 3, also that I would need more information, but I would say you have leaning more towards yes than no, so because you don't have maybe as an option.
Okay. Thank you. Richard.
I had it as no, yes, no.
Thank you. Raymond.
Number 1, no. Number 3, yes. And number 2, I'm kind of split. But I'll say no, slightly.
Okay. Kyra.
I'm gonna do no, no. Number 3 is a maybe, closer to yes than a no.
Thank you. Jesse. Did I catch you soon enough?
Yeah, I was just with a big old caveat that I don't think I understand either, like any of the options. I'm going to say no, no, yes.
Okay. Ryan.
Just call me Dr. No on all 3.
Okay. And what I'll say is, just listening to the responses, obviously there's a more fulsome discussion that we would need to have, and describing what each of these means more. And I should have put the little disclaimer that this isn't binding by any means, and I won't go forward and say the board blessed this, but rather just a quick sense of what we're talking about for levels of service.
Yeah, Brian, I'll qualify mine. Just like I said no to 2, However, I don't think we can increase the millage in isolation just to say we want to increase, to the public. We're gonna keep existing level of, service on demand response, and we need more property tax mill to get there in isolation. If we bundled an increase in millage with a lot of other things to get it, and that could be presented persuasively, then I might change to a yes. So I think all of these are qualified for me.
Absolutely. Well, and this is part of what my understanding of today's exercise really is part of this goes then to the consultants for the long range plan, and they're helping craft what that millage would look like, and they can further develop what those options might be, and we'll bring them back to the board at several iterations, I'm certain. So moving on, then the second bucket for short term was talking about eligibility. The paratransit study recommended that we begin administering a comprehensive ADA eligibility determination. This is a strategy that uses a more comprehensive process where applicants are required to come for an in-person interview and an assessment. Transit agency staff can explain and promote the use of fixed routes to applicants determined to be able to use the fixed routes for at least some of their trips. And I'll say that currently TheRide conducts only a limited number of in-person interviews. Those that are done are done by our transit travel trainer, which they noted in the paratransit study was a good practice, as she has the requisite skills to assess the ability to use a fixed route, because that's what her area of expertise is. And one note of interest about our ADA and A-Ride certification is that only 50% of the people that apply for an A-Ride certification ever take an A-Ride trip. So on average, when we're sending out renewals, because your A-Ride card lasts for 2 years, our travel trainer will examine how many trips you've taken in that 2-year period. And on average, about half haven't taken a single one, indicating that they're using the certification to ride the fixed route for free, but that they're also obviously able to ride the fixed route. And if that's the case, should we have a certification and eligibility program that would do a more thorough job of sussing that out, and be able to, if they're doing it for income purposes, let's figure out a different way to worry about fares. But folks who need to use the demand response service should be able to have access to it without it being overrun by folks that otherwise don't need to use it. And I'll say that we're similar to many transit agencies in that we provide free fares to those who are certified as paratransit eligible. However, the paratransit study noted that it may have the unintended effect of encouraging individuals to apply just to receive that free fare benefit. And they've promoted or suggested a more nuanced approach, which might provide free fare to those ADA riders who were granted conditional eligibility, and being able to use the fixed route some of the time. And conditional eligibility, and I'm going to go to my next quick poll because I want to keep moving through. I'll be honest with you, the long-term stuff is what I get all excited about. So I'm going to try to keep moving quickly here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the caveats on here and then run through everybody and ask your question. And I will say at first, the trade-off with these 3 questions is the perception of customer service. The more stringent the requirements, and they go basically, 1 is least, second is the first recommendation of the paratransit study, and then the third is a second recommendation of the paratransit study. They get progressively more stringent, which means the fewer people would get approved. No matter what the reason, no matter how valid, being refused can still be a negative experience. One way to mitigate this, and Matt has already given me this direction, and Gail and I are moving forward with this, is ensuring as many stops as possible on our fixed route system are fully accessible. As I mentioned, on average, half of our A-Ride cardholders don't take A-Ride trips for the time that they're certified. That's the first asterisk there. And then the second asterisk, set of asterisks, conditional eligibility. I've used the phrase a couple of times now and I haven't defined it. So conditional eligibility would be things like if there is snow on the ground, or if it is above a certain temperature, or if it's below a certain temperature, if it's at night versus a daytime trip, what conditions, they're often environmental, would prohibit you from being able to take a fixed route trip. It might be that it's too long of a trip, too complicated of a transfer to get to all of the places. So there's a number of different ways that there can be conditional eligibility. And I would say that the software we own is able to integrate some of those conditions automatically into a booking system, and some of them have to be taken on a case-by-case basis with the trip, and the call taker has to be trained on it. So they are not without cost. Number two does have a cost to having more staff time dedicated towards it. But the typical trade-off in both of those is that the fewer trips that you do, or the fewer people you have eligible, the fewer trips you're obligated to do, and the lower your costs. And so where do you balance those costs? So with that, I shall launch back into our quick poll. And I'm going to go in reverse order this time and say for 1, 2, and 3. Let me see here. Roger, I'm going to pick on you first.
All right, sorry I missed the first one. I lost the internet there for a while. I would say no, yes, yes.
Okay, Ryan.
I'm going to go yes.
Oh, we may have lost Ryan, so I'm going to skip Chairman Mahler.
I think Ryan was talking. I heard him.
Oh,
Go ahead, Ryan. Just speak up a little bit. Ryan, you there? He was starting to talk. Okay. Ryan, we lost you if you can hear us. Yeah, I know 1 and 3 are contradictory to each other. I'm going to say yes, no, no.
okay. Kyra.
I guess I'll do yes, no, no as well.
Raymond.
No, no, yes.
Richard.
No, yes, yes.
Kathleen.
No, maybe leaning towards yes and yes.
And last but not least, well, maybe not last, we'll see, Mike.
No, yes, yes, but let me just say, it would be really nice to see some good statistics on A-Ride, like we pretty much see on fixed route in terms of ridership, cost, and things like that, particularly over time.
Okay. And circling back to Ryan, can you hear us and can we hear you?
Can you hear me now? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Go ahead, Ryan, but we can barely hear you, but go ahead.
Hang on. Hang on. Is that any better?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I was going to go yes all the way down, but let's do no, yes, yes.
Okay.
Did that copy? Could you hear me?
Yep, I did. Okay. So we now launch into the fuzzy side of the presentation and get into the long-term ideas and discussion about mobility management. And actually, I promise that's the last time I'm going to put you guys on the spot for a poll without enough information, because the questions from here on out get much less hard choose between A and B and more, tell me what you're thinking. And I got to say that with mobility management, I love our industry. You know, I've been doing it since I was 19. But we get to make a difference in people's lives every day. No matter what you need to do, you need to travel to get there, unless it's a board retreat, and then you can do it online. But there's a lot less hard data on this. But the topic still excites me because I see that this is a way to more efficiently use existing resources in a coordinated fashion. In Matt's first poll, many of you responded that we should be helping those who can't drive and attracting car owners to transit. And I'm sorry that Jesse had to drop out, but I will say that I really liked his example of the ramp and the stairs. And that if you clear the snow off the ramp, everybody can get around. And if you clear off the stairs first, you're still leaving some folks out. And I really believe that with mobility management, we can help those who can't drive and attract car owners to transit, because we can increase options for everyone with existing resources. We make it easier for those without a vehicle and provide the flexibility that people need who own cars to say, you know what, I don't need to take my car today because I can get anywhere I need to go with enough flexibility that the independence that I get from having my car parked nearby is mitigated by the flexibility I have with all these different options that I can have. And as we're talking about all of these things, I quoted our board ends here just to think about how these fit in with our board ends. And the New Urban Mobility Alliance out of Boston refers to this as a transportation revolution, and that technology is changing everything about how we get around cities. The NUMO was founded by the founder of Zipcar, a woman named Robin Chase. And they've said that the new tech-based mobility disruptions, from electric scooters to ride-hailing apps to autonomous vehicles, are part of a transportation revolution. These changes will affect the future of cities and the people living and working in them, as well as implications for the environment, jobs, public spending, governance, health, privacy, safety, and more. Whether they move us towards or away a better future will depend on how we act, how we collaborate, and how we challenge the status quo to achieve the best outcome for all. And they have developed 10 principles on new mobility, and I'm just going to share 5 of them in the next 2 slides and not spend too much time on them, but really just note for me that how much they fit in with the board's ends policies. So the second principle is focusing on moving people, not vehicles. The third is encouraging the efficient use of space and assets. The fourth is engaging stakeholders in decision-making. The fifth is designing for equitable access. And in fact, you see our ramp and chair scenario drawn right there. And the final is to promote integration for seamless connectivity. These are all things I think the board could get behind. They match up. You could almost take these and put them into our board ends. And the other place that I went for a source for information was a Shared Use Mobility Center, which is the employer of our former board member, Prashanth Gururaja. Transportation is the second largest expense for most families after housing. And the lack of a reliable access to a car, bus, or train is one of the biggest barriers to employment for Americans today. And this is where I mentioned that it costs as much to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in Ypsilanti as it does to own a car. If we can capture and coordinate efficiently the resources that are already spent on transportation, we have the ability to help somebody be housed and still travel as they need. The difference between living in your car so that you can be mobile and living in a home because mobility is coordinated is similar to thinking about transportation like a utility. You don't talk about buying the water pipes or the electric lines or the sewer lines for your house when you live in a city. Those are all just provided for you, and you're able to tap into them at one fee. You don't have to pay separately for a sewer lift pump and a sewer line, to your door. It's all just part of a fee, and we can get there with shared mobility. This is actually one of the things that really attracted me to come to Ann Arbor in the first place, was that so many of these things were already being done here. So the new forms, and this is from the shared mobility out of Chicago. New forms of shared mobility offer new opportunities to address some of the most critical issues facing our society. In combination, and I put transit at the top for a reason, in combination with public transit, shared mobility is a powerful tool that cities can use to help reduce transportation costs, lessen air pollution, expand access to jobs, opportunity, and a better quality of life. And this is where that concept of a utility can come in. We can be a broker. People can come to us as a transportation utility to find their preferred way to get around. Today, I need to use a card. So I'm going to use TheRide to secure a zip car. And then tomorrow I'm going to use TheRide to ride a bus. Nice day tomorrow, I might ride a bike share. This is that clearing the ramp first, because we can work on the subsidy of getting the access, but people can make their own choices as to what works best for them in here. And you don't have to own each of these modes in order to, you don't have to own your own bike or your own car to be able to have the choice that you can use the bus or be able to use a car on a certain day. In Denmark, they did this by selling an access pass that was not an insignificant cost, but still less than owning a car in Europe, admittedly. But it gave citizens the access to their mode of choice for one price. And they got access to regional rail and intercity bus and bike share and all of it all together. And in terms of shared mobility being a powerful tool, again, I'd ask you to think about how that is really chock full of the board's ends. One of the other things that shared mobility can help with is that we have varied regions. We have suburbs, we have cities, and we even have rural sections of town. And it can be difficult to provide service and Forrest's presentation was part of this. When you go far distances and there's not density, it's hard to have a fixed route be successful. Suburbs can isolate older adults and those who can't afford transportation and lack the land used to support active modes like walking and biking. Cities fight with congestion, high commute times, and lack of equal opportunity and job access, yet have the ability to be truly multimodal. You see all of those elements around the circle available in our cities. And then rural areas face an older population and widespread economic decline, although again, not necessarily in our rural areas. Functionally, having a car is a necessity, as not everybody can or choose to drive. And shared mobility adds choices and enhances the quality of life across all three of these. And now we get into some nitty gritty with 10 minutes left. So Matt, I'm sorry, I'm going as fast as I can here. We have some options that some are concrete and some are fuzzier. So there are existing programs that we could model ourselves after in this space. The closest example of which is non-emergency medical transportation. And I need a drink. This is currently a very successful program in Flint, Michigan that the RTA in Flint runs, among other places. If we get a request for an A-ride that is for a medical trip, what if we could offer NEMT to that person? The NEMT provider gets reimbursed by Medicaid at a reasonable rate, and either we can be a provider or we can contract with somebody. The passenger gets their ride, which is ultimately what they wanted, and they get it at a reimbursed reasonable rate, and we don't have to bear the cost of providing that same ride. It costs us the same as it costs the NEMT provider, but we can only charge $3 maximum for the trip. And so there's a win for everybody involved in there. The other thing, and there are other programs that are not as widely adopted or proven, but still possible, and that's on the other side, mobility apps, integrated apps that allow for booking across multiple modes. This requires partnerships and data to be transferred in a way that can be complicated and difficult. And so that's where it gets pretty fuzzy. However, none of these choices are without cost. Every attempt at forming a partnership for mobility management is time and effort away from some other project. So it should be noted with that. And I come to peak fuzzy here, I would say. And that if at the last retreat, our question was ridership versus coverage, for this topic, I would ask you this, and it's not a yes or no, and it's not even a percentage that I'm really asking for someone to give. But what are your reactions to these ideas? And we'll pull from your comments to provide direction to the consultants as to what to explore going forward. One possibility, I would say, is a feasibility study on NEMT or some of the other options. And tying it back to the short-term decisions, adopting mobility management options. If you think back to where we separated out TheRide and premium services, you can make those premium services so attractive that really they're the preferred option, and that TheRide is really only the backstop to make sure that people get where they need to go in an absolute way. So with that, I don't know, Matt, since we have only 5 minutes left, if you want me to go through and poll everybody about their reactions to this, if you just want to do popcorn and let everybody tell me, or just submit your thoughts afterwards so that you can wrap us up.
I think today's retreat is going to spill over into future board meetings regardless, both in your section and in Forest's. We'll be talking about all these things more, either as part of the consultant's work or possibly individually. So I don't want to cram everything in here or make everyone feel like this is the only opportunity we have.
I would
Maybe the
agree,
time
Matt. I would agree. Matt, I would just agree that, you know, we're going to have a lot more discussion about this, and this is what Brian just gave us. This is the money stuff right here. This is when we've all thought about future planning and this kind of stuff. I think this is the key data that we were thinking about, and I think there's probably going to be a lot of dialogue. So why don't we thank you for introducing it. And I would say, let's table this and bring it back maybe at a future board meeting, even the next board meeting, March or April, something like that, so we could even get into a deeper dive discussion on this, both at the committee and maybe at the board level.
All right, so with that in mind, I'll just ask, Brian introduced some new terms, and like you said, peak fuzzy. My closing comments are going to be very brief. Does anyone have any questions of clarification for Brian? You heard something new, you weren't sure what he meant, or anything like that? Roger?
I'm looking at the shared mobility diagram here, and just so I'm understanding, we're talking about sort of a system that would integrate usage of all of these different aspects, so that essentially a user goes to just one, whether it's website or app or whatever, to arrange whatever type of transportation they need, using whatever combination works best for that individual. Is that sort of the goal here?
That's exactly correct.
Thanks.
Yeah, my first thought was, I would love if we can pull this off. The private sector is going to hate it, but I would love if we could pull this off.
Okay, any other questions of clarification? With that, maybe I have one slide to share. Let's see if I can get it up. Okay, so wrapping up our conversations for today, thank you very much. We had some great conversation, some good focus. Perhaps staff, in retrospect, maybe you felt like you were drinking from a fire hose. I don't know. We really gave you a lot, but I think following up in future board meetings is a good idea to continue these discussions, because we're talking about important things, and that matters. So what I want to do at the moment is ask, is there anything else that we haven't touched on yet in one of these 2 meetings or all these sessions that is stuff you want to know more about or you think needs to be taken into consideration as part of our long-term strategy, either as a service or a constraint, an opportunity or a threat? And I've kept a running list just over the last year of things that have popped up from board members and from staff. You know, what about the RTA and regional stuff? Dedicated bus lanes we heard about, electric buses, obviously subject to discussion. What about the bike share program? It's all in mothballs right now. Where's that going? Transportation demand management is a huge potential field for us, but we haven't really gotten in there in great detail. We've touched on other things as well. So I just wanted to have a moment here at the end. Is there anything else any of you have wanted to raise for the ride to really consider that we haven't touched on already or isn't on this page? And I see Eric.
I think we've touched on it, but could you add our involvement with our legal owners regarding transit-oriented development and the city planning type aspects of our legal owners and how we integrate into that?
Certainly. Mike?
One thing that is actually not on this list that was maybe on a chart is a P, but I think we should have it named individually as Park and Ride.
Excellent. Other thoughts or suggestions? Raymond?
Yeah, I am seeing, some pilots from across the country that are embarking on sort of public-private partnerships. So for example, when I was back in Las Vegas, we had done a pilot on using Lyft and Uber vouchers in lieu of paratransit. The thought being that paratransit was costing about $35 per ride. If we gave a voucher for $15 on Uber and Lyft, that would have a net savings to the agency of $20 per trip. And so, whether that's a long-term tenable solution, I think there are some opportunities out there, especially for some of these, we talk about bike share, things like that. I think there might be opportunities for partnerships.
Excellent. An interesting note, taxi vouchers were the go-to solution back in the 70s and 80s, and technology's made that a far more viable option today than it was then. Other ideas, suggestions, thoughts of things that we should at least consider? So as we go forward, more ideas will crop up, but when the torrent of ideas begins to slow to a trickle, that usually means, okay, we're getting most of them. So where do we go from here? So just as we wrap up today, I want to say thank you to all of you for everything you've contributed over the last month in both of these sessions. I want to thank Forrest and Brian for all their hard work on the slides. I want to thank Keith for manning the Zoom meeting and made it look easy, as well as all the other staff who contributed to all of this work. So where are we going from here? As I said, we're at the beginning of the beginning. We've got a 12-month process that's starting to wrap up. We're going to be hearing more from the consultants. They'll have similar questions, but I think you guys are very well primed now with these retreats to answer these questions in a much more informed manner, perhaps, than we've been before. We've also scratched the surface of trade-offs and priorities. And I think we've discovered a few options for things that we need to follow up with you on sooner rather than later. Particularly in Brian's area, there's some time-sensitive decisions that we're going to need to move forward on. So the process with the consultants is still evolving. We look forward to bringing back to you, a Gantt chart and some very specific, this happens and then this happens and this happens. You've already seen a preliminary one, but it's being refined. Public involvement is going to be a very big part of that. Some preliminary stakeholder involvement is already underway. So we'll be bringing back a broader process for you, but everything that we've gleaned from you on these retreats is going to be forwarded to the consultants. They may watch these recordings. They'll certainly get the notes and the polls and the results of that. And as I said before, when we walk them through the board's ends and executive limitations policies, they're actually pretty keen because they end up spending a lot of time usually with clients trying to get that kind of information, and you've already provided a lot of it. So now we're into the really high value part of that discussion, which is setting priorities. It's the hardest stuff. It's the least clear, peak fuzzy, if you will. But it's the most important part of our governance and leadership responsibility. So as we wrap up here, I'll say thank you again and turn it back to Eric for closing out the meeting formally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt, and certainly echo your thank yous to Brian, Forrest, Keith, and everybody else who contributed to what I think was a very productive, far-reaching retreat, and a lot more to come on this. So thanks, everybody. Does anybody have any other concerns or questions before we adjourn? If not, can I have a motion to adjourn? Kathleen, seconded by Roger. We'll just go down the list. Yes or no to adjourn? Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sue is not here. Roger?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
I'm also a yes. Did I miss anybody? Oh, did I miss Raymond? I'm sorry. That's on my screen. The sweater is like front and center on my screen. I don't know how the hell I could miss it. I mean,
A protest vote.
Reminded
No,
me.
no to.
okay, so Raymond's a yes. Sorry. All right. Thank you, everybody, and we're adjourned.
Thank you all.